Contrary to what a lot of people out there say on YouTube, making interviews look good when you're outside and on the go does not need to be challenging. It doesn't need to be cumbersome or expensive. You don't need huge fancy diffusion grids or a grip truck full of stands to hold all your equipment, because if you have the right technique, you can shape natural light using some of the simplest gear out there. So this week, in part 2 of my mini-series on how to film outdoor interviews, I'm going to share how I use very simple light modifiers to get the most out of my interviews as a run and gun documentarian. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer. And on this channel, I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. Today's video is part 2 of my outdoor interview mini-series. In part 1, we went over strategies for filming interviews using no light modification tools. I went over how to use the shade to your advantage, what to do if you have to film in direct sunlight, and we chatted about the 3 principles of filming interviews that I think about as a cinematographer: light, depth, and composition. If you haven't checked out that video, I will link to it in the description. This week, we're once again heading out into the Berkeley Hills, but this time we're talking through how to use very simple light modification tools. These are tools that I use all the time, from passion projects to documentary series on Hulu. And remember, when I'm talking through my strategies, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I work in small teams, if I have a team at all. I value a light and minimalist approach, and that's not for everyone, but that's the way I roll. So let's go out into the hills to scout some interview spots, and we'll see how it goes. We are here in the Berkeley Hills. This time we're not out in the wilderness. This week we're in a lovely backyard space where we're gonna be doing our interview. And I wanted to start by letting you see some of the light modification tools that I brought today. Now, to be honest, it's pretty rare that I bring these with me on most of my documentary shoots. And that's just because when we're doing interviews outside, typically I'm just using natural light and I'm moving really quick. So, if I'm a solo shooter on a documentary production and we're moving from space to space outdoors, likely we're not gonna have the car right by to just have this gear, and I'm not gonna be lugging this throughout the day. So it's pretty rare that I would bring this. So if you get comfortable just filming interviews outside with no light modification tools, in my experience, based on the shoots that I do, that's the most useful skill, but it's also helpful to know how to use these tools right here. So what I have, first off is I have 2 sizes of 5-in-1 reflectors. 5-in-1 reflectors are so great, so useful for so many different scenarios. And here I have one from Newer, and I'll put links to all this in the description of the video. And then I have one from Impact. The Impact one is quite a bit larger than the Newer one, and you'll see what those look like when we break them out. But again, these are tools to soften the light that maybe cost, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks, something like that. We got a couple different types of clamps. Clamps are useful, especially when we're gonna be looking to hang the scrim, the negative fill, the 5-in-1 reflectors. When we're hanging those up, clamps can be useful. Sandbags. This is something that I'm really bad about because I often don't use sandbags, but I'm educating today, so I'm gonna educate with the correct practices. Helpful to have sandbags. And that is true when you're hanging up light modifiers outdoors, because they can become sails in the wind on a windy day. Okay, and then I have 2 different stands here. These are kind of cool stands that, again, have a lot of different use cases, and I'm always looking for gear that can be used in a lot of different ways. So this stand right here is the Manfrotto Combi stand. It's the 420B, and this right here is the Impact 3218. Both these stands can just be used like this, just your typical stand, but then they can also be used as like a boom arm, or in our case today, they can be used to hold some sort of 5-in-1 reflector at a different angle. So if we need to put something above someone's head based on the light angle, based on how high the sun is in the sky, you can turn the stand like that, and you can clamp on a reflector or a scrim, in different directions. So that's why I specifically like these stands when I'm doing interviews outside. Okay, so that's it. That's the gear that I brought here today. And again, it's not the gear that I bring on most shoots, but occasionally. And oftentimes I will have at least one of these pieces or a few of these pieces, definitely the 5-in-1 reflectors in my car, because you never know when they're gonna come into use. All right, so we are gonna bring out my amazing sister-in-law, Ashley, and we are gonna do a little interview setup in the sun to begin, and we're gonna see what it looks like with those 5-in-1 reflectors in use. Let's do it. We have some lovely seating, a table here. Now we're in a backyard setting, so assuming that I'd be on a documentary shoot where we're doing an interview with someone maybe who lives here at this house, we want to find somewhere that's comfortable for them to be. And so this is a nice table. I know Ashley just got this table at Facebook Marketplace, so I know we're proud of it. So we're gonna set her up right there. And one of the things that I'm thinking about when I choose a spot for my outdoor interviews, specifically now when I'm using light modification tools, is I can have Ashley in that direct sunlight and know that I'm gonna bring in my own shade to cut that light down and make it a whole lot softer. So if we come here, this is without any light modification, and what you'll see here is very harsh shadows on the side of her face that is on the side of the camera here, and then it's very dark in the background. But I'm thinking if we bring in some a scrim and hang it up in this area here to block the sun and give a nice soft light there, we might be able to bring up all our levels in camera, which looks way overexposed here, but I think we might be able to bring up all the levels in the camera to make the background pretty nicely exposed, as well as Ashley. So we'll see. But one of the reasons that I like this spot here is because it is relatively dark with some dappled sunlight in the background. Because when you are putting a scrim or a silk in front of somebody, you are gonna be cutting the light. So it is gonna be darker than just like the ambient sunlight on other spaces in the backyard. So we're gonna try this here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use the larger of my two 5-in-1 reflectors, and specifically I'm going to be using this one, which is called the Impact 3218. And this one is specifically, when you order this one, it specifically comes with these little clamps here. You can see that, those little clamps, and those are going to be great for clamping the 5-in-1 reflectors. Okay, so this is a pretty big one here. And the reason that I usually use the bigger one versus the smaller one is because the smaller one only really works if you're getting like very tight with your framing, because the sun's gonna move and we wanna be able to cover our subject in the shade and her whole body in the shade. We don't wanna see her face in the shade, but then kind of like some sunlight hitting her arm. We wanna hit her whole body. So having the bigger size is nice, even though it's a little unwieldy. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna try to put this up here. And the sun is currently at an angle. It's low enough in the horizon that I don't think we're gonna have to hang the scrim above her head. So we should just be able to have it vertically. And what I'm looking for here is, can I get this to cover her completely in shade like that? So, well, this part will be all cut out. Awesome. And because these clamps can sometimes be a little fussy, I like to have my own clamps on hand and give a little bit of a little extra for them. Let's bring this camera back in so we can start to see what we're dealing with. So That's already way better. So you already see here that just adding that one piece of material does so much for our image here. You look like a star, Ashley. Okay, so let's quickly look, just give you a before and after if I were to take away that scrim here. Okay, so another thing that you'll notice here in how I framed the interview setup right here is, again, like we talked about last week, I'm thinking about how I'm using the sun as my key light, and then I'm shooting from the shadow side. So the sun is our key light coming from over here. We have this beautiful, nice softbox, and then I would sit probably right next to the camera here, and Ashley would look towards me and talk to me just like that. So we want to shoot from the shadow side here. If you wanted to get even more fancy, you could bring in another 5-in-1 reflector. If you wanted to add some more contrast, you could set something like this up right here to kind of put more shadow on this side of Ashley's face. You know, it might do a little bit. You can kind of see a little bit less shadow, more shadow, less, more. I'm not gonna do that because I'd rather not hang up more and more gear, but just know that you do have the option. Other thing that you should remember, especially with that up, is the sandbag, because these can go crazy in the wind. All right, so let's see if there are any fine adjustments that we would need to make here. So one thing I'm seeing in our image is on this side of Ashley, we still have some pretty bright light hitting that rock wall. So like right over here, right over her shoulder. So that could be a question of thinking what we want to do there. Now I can either frame us like that to have a little bit less of that wall. The other option would be to adjust our 5-in-1 reflector. So because we're framed pretty tight, I could flip the 5-in-1 reflector to be horizontal, and that might cover more of this wall. So why don't we give that a try? I'm gonna see if I can just bring in another stand here. Again, we'll use my trusty clamp, and there we go. All right, so we put the scrim horizontal, and now you can see here we have a lot more that we can play with in terms of our framing, because now we have that shadow also hitting the rock wall behind her. So it doesn't look like we just put, you know, a scrim in the sky and we're just casting a shadow on Ashley. It looks like this whole area has that nice soft light. So when I'm thinking about framing Ashley, I'm now gonna start thinking about what I wanna do with these bright green, bright yellow plants in the background, because those really pop and they're kind of nice. And I have the option for where I want to frame those, kind of like around Ashley's head right there. And I don't want any of those plants like sticking out of her head. So right here, I'm kind of liking this. We're in a spot where she's framed up pretty nicely. One thing I am noticing is we do have this one little plant behind her neck here that's kind of like coming out of her neck. So I might see if there's anything we can do framing wise to cut that out. I mean, it doesn't bother me too much. We could do something like that. We can get a little closer and kind of like have her covering it up a little bit. Let's come back to this spot right here. I'm kind of liking that. Now again, one more demonstration of that negative fill in case you would want to do that. That's with negative fill, without, with, without. All right, so I think that is our final setup here. Ashley, can I have you look at my hand here? There's one thing okay. So can you look up a little bit? So one thing you'll notice you can see in her sunglasses, right now she's wearing sunglasses, and you can actually catch the reflection of the scrim in her sunglasses. And so if that's the case, you're just gonna have to, raise, lower, kind of find your levels there. But if I'm sitting here, and that's why I asked Ashley, look at my hand, if you look at my hand again, when she looks down a little bit, then we start to lose that scrim. So I would just need to make sure as the interviewer, or if I'm the DP and there's a director here who's doing the interviews, to just make sure I'm conscious of that, because I wouldn't want those catching in her sunglasses that much. The other thing you can do, obviously, is ask them if they're comfortable taking off their sunglasses. Just like that.
It's much better with the scrim up.
Is it? Feels good? Okay, awesome. So let's see what that looks like. And one other thing that I wanted to show with the 5-in-1 reflector that you could do is, instead of having the negative fill, if you wanted to give a little bit of a bounce right here, you can use the other side. You can use white, or you can use the silver side, and you can just kick back a little light. So this would be way too intense if we hit her with that. That just looks very unnatural. But let's see what happens if we just put something like this, a nice little kick. We can also flip the 5-in-1 reflector. We have gold. Okay, so now we have the white side here. So let's see. So this is nothing. If we want to separate her from this background here just a little bit, we could bring this in. You can just angle, play with it. So you could do something like that, just to separate the back of her head. Essentially, you're putting in a hair light here. And just so we can see what it looks like, Ashley speaking to me as the director. All right. Oh! What is your favorite plant in the garden?
I love the leucospermum. It is a bright coral. It has a bright coral burst of a flower, and some people call it a pincushion.
All right.
Not nervous at all.
Okay, so that is our sunshine setup. 2 use cases for different scrim 5-in-1 reflectors, stands, clamps, and now we're gonna move to a shady setup to just see if we can do anything there. Okay, I just thought of something, because as we are about to move to the shade location, I'm gonna put down these 5-in-1 reflectors. And it took me forever to learn how to fold these on my own. I swear the first time that I was on set with these, especially the big one, I just looked absolutely, I looked like the biggest amateur, because I could not figure out how to fold these 5-in-1 reflectors. So here's the small one. What you do, you have your hands, whoop, your hands like this. You're gonna flip one of them around. So we have one forward like that, one kind of flipped. And then you're gonna twist in like that. Hopefully that made sense. Now the big one, oh boy. Okay, here's what you do to fold this one. You're gonna put it down on the ground, like that. You're going to step with your foot on the bottom. And then you're going to just coil it down. You do not know how proud I am that I just did that. I've come so far in my career. Okay, so we're on our way to the shade, and it's about dinner time. So we're not doing a full setup here, but I do want to show you how you can shape the light in the shade for an interview if the situation calls for it. And so what I have here, similar to what I talked about last week on the channel, is I chose a shady spot to put Ashley for her interview. And here's our camera. And one of the things that I chose this spot for was because we're kind of shooting into a corner there, and a corner always adds really nice depth. Here is our current frame on the camera. And that could be pretty nice right there, but what I want to show you is a way that you can bounce sunlight and use that as your key light. So this image right here could look pretty nice. Would you look right here? Kind of like turn your body a little bit. Yeah. So that could be nice. And we could just bring up the exposure on everything. But say this is a scenario where you maybe want more contrast between Ashley in the background, like you want her to pop a little bit more and you want the background for whatever reason to remain like a little bit darker. What you can do is we can add more key light by bouncing the sun that's coming over the roof onto Ashley, onto this side of her face. So if it wasn't about dinner time, we could hang this up on one of these stands. But what we're gonna instead do is I'm gonna just show you myself. You could also have a production assistant do this if you're having, short interviews where they wouldn't have to be holding it for too long. But you can essentially find your sun, boom, right there, and then you can kind of angle that and start to play with how much sunlight you're gonna be bouncing from the sun onto her face. So there is with the bounce, there is without it, with it, without. And you can play with the distance, right? So the further away you're gonna be, it's gonna be a little bit more dispersed light. Closer in, you might get a little bit more intensity. So my helpers were not available inside because some very solid television is on. So we did hang up the bounce and we are bouncing the sunlight. So we are transferring our key light from over there to boom, boom, this side. And now I'm gonna grab my chair for the interview. What did you say?
I said drum roll.
Drum roll. Finally, we're gonna do our interview here. Let's have our question be, what's your favorite part about living in Berkeley?
Next question.
Can we have you introduce yourself? What is your name and what do you do as your profession?
My name is Ashley.
Yeah.
I am not an actor. I am a special education teacher and a mom and an artist.
Okay, there's our shade setup. One way to bounce the sunlight. I hope that helped you get some ideas for how you can use some very simple and inexpensive equipment to start getting some more control of the light when you are filming outdoors. If there are any other techniques that you use, please jump into the comments and let me know. I'm trying to learn as much as possible, and I know that a lot of you watching have your own way of going about nailing these things, and there's no right or wrong answer, so let us know what's working for you. All right, I'll see you next week. Go out and tell some stories.